The following is an original production of AZPM News.
For Arizona Public Media, I'm Erika Hamden, professor of astrophysics at the University of Arizona, and this is Arizona Science. Joining me today is Barbara Carrapa, professor of geosciences at the university. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you for inviting me.
So first, you were an author on a very interesting paper which connects algae blooms happening millions of years ago with the deaths of whales. So can you tell us a little bit about that and like how do you connect algae to whales and know these things that are happening millions of years ago?
Yeah, it all started by research in coastal Chile called Cerro Ballena, which means whale hills, was discovered in 2010 during the excavation of the Pan American Highway. Scientists found basically 4 individual species of baleen whales, perfectly preserved. And they actually had suggested that these mass death assemblages were related to algal blooms. So we had been working in the Andes for a long time. One thing that we actually noted was that these deposits that contained these whales also contained a lot of ashes, volcanic ashes from the Andes. And again, knowing quite a bit about the Andes, I've been working on the tectonics of the Andes for over 20 years now. I couldn't help but think that there was a connection between volcanism and these death assemblages, these mass stranding that were identified in these deposits. They're late Miocene in age, so about 7 million years ago. And that's also a time when the Andes were very, very active from a volcanic point of view. There is this area in the central Andes called the Altiplano Puna volcanic complex, which is one of the largest volcanic center on Earth, and it was very, very active at that time. So we basically decided to start dating those volcanic ashes within the deposits, and we found at least a temporal connection between when the ashes were deposited and where the whales were found. And we also found, in conjunction with those ashes, diatom deposits, which are basically marine algae, which constitute most of the basically primary producers today. And those were basically found as well in conjunction with the ashes. So it was basically a perfect, combination of evidence that suggested that there was a link between, again, volcanoes in the Andes and marine productivity.
So these whales, did they just like die and then sink to the bottom and then that eventually gets uplifted, or are they like beaching themselves?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So our research combined with previous studies suggests that actually the whales died at sea and then were transported in a sort of a marginal marine coastal environment through storms. And they were all piled up actually in a very organized way. And that's why we think that the storms played a big role in actually moving those whales on the coast. And so now they're found in marginal marine deposits that they're late Miocene in age. And those deposits have been uplifted, and so they're preserved along the coast. And that's where we can find them and study them.
Was the impact to the whales like that the cooling of things, or the algae used up all the available nutrients? Like, do you guys know the mechanism of that directly caused this mass whale death?
We think that productivity, at least at a local scale, like in coastal Chile, was increased enough to produce those what we call harmful algal blooms, which kill the whales in some places. On a global scale, the nutrients from the Andes increase productivity enough to basically allow them to draw down CO2 through photosynthesis. And then eventually, when they die, they carry the carbon with them. And if you store that in the deep ocean, you can sequester carbon. Another way to basically affect the global carbon cycle is, again, those diatoms, they feed other organisms like krill, which eventually feed the whales. And so they basically create a chain reaction where all those ecosystems are working together to just sequester carbon. And eventually when they die, they carry that carbon with them.
It's also kind of amazing to me that you can be studying something like how the Andes form, how mountains form, but it actually has this huge impact all the way into the deep ocean. Like,
right.
It's not just an immediate thing. It actually reverberates, everywhere.
Right. Yeah.
How actually are the Andes forming, or how did they form?
Yeah, so the Andes go back a long time ago. I will say that, you start forming a significant mountain belt with high elevation starting already in, let's say, 50 to 30 million years ago. So the Andes were active and big mountains early on. But it was not until the late Miocene, Pliocene that you really see this incredible increase in volcanic activity associated with the Altiplano Puna volcanic complex, which erupted a massive amount of ash. So those are super volcanoes. And so you can imagine that if you put all these volcanic ash that is rich in iron and phosphorus into the ocean, that is going to have an effect in terms of primary productivity.
It's basically like you're just like fertilizing the entire ocean.
Correct. And so if you do it at the right time, in the right place, or I should say in the right place, that's going to eventually have an effect on the overall ecosystem and potentially global climate. And the late Miocene is a time that is a very interesting time because that's where we see a sharp decline in sea surface temperature up to 6 degrees globally. And that's a very important signal that we observed. And people have suggested different mechanisms, mostly to do with either increasing chemical weathering, drawing CO2 down, to decreasing actually CO2 output into the atmosphere and ocean. What we suggest is more like a biological mechanism driven by tectonics, but it's the biology of the ocean is key in our model.
Does your model say anything about like what happens in the atmosphere during this time? Because I imagine if you have these super volcanoes going off and all this ash is in the air, is that also making it colder and like blocking the sun and having an impact on life that's on the land?
Yeah, theoretically, you can have that, an effect of, again, shielding Earth from sunlight. You can also have the opposite effect when you have a lot of volcanic activity. You have CO2 in the
coming
atmosphere.
Out of the volcano.
Yes. So we have not quantitatively, evaluated these processes. We know they are important and they need to be taken into account. What we have quantified is the effect of that fertilization in the ocean in terms of the biology of the ocean. But it's definitely just the beginning of, hopefully, more science coming out and more projects that are going to look at all the connections possibly related to volcanism and the effect of volcanism on global climate.
Are there other places or where there's like a known supervolcano in the past where you could kind of look for similar effects happening?
Yellowstone will be one that I will look for. And definitely North America in the Cenozoic was very active. And so that's something that can be explored. And in fact, there are similar deposits in the Middle Miocene in North America that contain mammals, fossils, diatoms that have been studied, but I think not with this idea in mind, which could be definitely exploited in the future.
What got you interested in the Andes? You had said that you've been working down there for 2 decades.
Yeah, I'm fundamentally a geologist, and I'm interested in how mountains form. And so the Andes are some of the highest mountains on the planet. And I've started working there since my postdoc years and continued working there because they basically preserve a wealth of information on how mountains form and interact with surface processes over the last 50 million years. So it's a perfect place to really explore those connections and understand what drives mountain building. And so this research is a natural sort of progression to my original interest that includes now more of a biological and climate component to what I've been doing for a long time.
Okay, well, thank you so much for talking with us, Barbara.
Thank you for inviting me.
This is Erika Hamden, and you've been listening to Arizona Science. We've been talking with Barbara Carrapa, professor of sedimentary geology at the University of Arizona, all about the Andes and whales and volcanoes. You can hear more of this conversation and others on our Arizona Science segments by going to azpm.org/Arizona Science.
The This has been an original production of AZPM News.